Today we're doing another early access game, so take that into account. The game released pretty recently, and there's a lot to be added and changed, so consider this more of a first impression than a traditional review. I'm talking about this game, however, because it's one of the few roguelikes that's really caught my attention as of late. And this is a genre that's become heavily oversaturated over the past few years, and I burned out on them a good while back. But I keep going in the hopes that one of these games will bring me back to that spark that the earlier games had, and this one might just be that. We're heading off into the vast expanse of space for a roguelike that I saw one person describe as potentially being the next FTL, which is a pretty high bar to reach. So, how closely does it live up to the standards set by its predecessors? It's time we see for ourselves. This is Breachway. I'm not entirely sure what to say about the visuals, honestly, as nothing necessarily jumps out at me. It looks nice, it's got that cell shading to it that I like, kinda like a 3D version of FTL if we're gonna keep making that comparison. The perspective of the fights looks cool, a split screen view of your ship and the enemy ship on either side, even allowing you to click and drag on each side to examine the ships from every angle. Plus, your ship modules will actually appear on your ship when you equip it, giving you a clearer sense of progression as you go through the game. The music has that same kind of feel as FTL too, some gentle sci-fi tunes to almost zone out to while you're playing. I don't mean for any of these comparisons to come off as though I'm calling this a ripoff, I should point out. It's clearly inspired and is iterating on what FTL started, and I think it's worked for the most part. When I think of Breachway, visuals just aren't the first thing that comes to mind, but they're certainly not bad. It's the same thing with the music and the general audio design. Breachway is a roguelike, and that means that the story isn't really at the forefront the whole way through. That's not to say there isn't one, there is, and I'll get to that, but the game is more focused on the moment-to-moment narrative encounters on each map node rather than the grand narrative. Said grand narrative being that there's a mysterious signal being emitted somewhere on the other end of the galaxy, and you, as captain of your own ship and crew, have opted to go hunt down the source. As you do, you make regular encounters with 4 different factions: the militaristic Solari, the almost tech-worshipping Starkin, the independently minded free roamers, and the Deadweights, who are essentially an organized pirate faction. Your relationship with each faction can influence events during certain encounters, like being denied docking rights at a station node due to the local faction not liking you, or being able to avoid a combat node entirely because the local faction does like you, that kind of stuff. Each encounter has its own little micro story if you care to read that kind of stuff. So you're building up a personal narrative of how you got from one end of the system to the other. And really, that's about it as far as the narratives go right now. Like I said, the game is still in early access. But speaking of, let's talk about the gameplay in a bit more detail.
Missile is in flight.
Breachway, as stated earlier, is a roguelike space game set in the same sort of vein as the now legendary FTL. In your quest to discover the source of this mystery signal, you travel along semi-procedurally generated space lanes to reach the end of the level, fight a boss, and then do it again for the next level until you hit the end. Or at least the current end, given that this game is still in early access as of making this review. You can choose to either stick to the blue lanes that only let you move forward, or you can go in the yellow lanes that let you move however you want, with the catch being that these shortcuts cost fuel to cross through. No fuel, no shortcut. And also, you might lose out on bonuses, as sometimes special encounters or secrets are tucked away in those lanes, like pods that can hold potential crew members who grant unique bonus abilities in combat, that kind of thing. Speaking of, combat is most of what you'll be doing in this game. Anytime you enter a combat scenario, you draw a hand of cards, because it's that kind of game. The cards are influenced by potential factors like buffs, debuffs, and more importantly, the modules you have attached to your ship. Each module adds certain cards to your deck, from weapons to shields to various utilities that you upgrade with more cards after each battle. You start out the game with a specific ship design that heavily influences your starting playstyle by having certain weapon types attached to it, as well as giving you predetermined reputations with each of the in-game factions. You can use lasers to do precise strikes against your enemies, overwhelm your enemies with missiles, hack their systems, or just shred their hulls, among other things. Naturally, you'll want to play into whatever you start out with for the most part, unless you come across something truly broken. The devs have already announced plans for a new ship and new weapons to come in the future as of writing this, so there's definitely more content to come. As of right now, there's about 4 ships. One for each faction, essentially. All in all, however, I'd say the game has a pretty decent start going. Resource management and explaining how certain mechanics like shredding work are things that I think they need to work on some more, however, as well as the difficulty level with some of these ships. Certain ships it feels almost impossible to progress very far with. Mainly ships like flak. Ships that use flak weapons seem just far too weak for the later bosses. Especially since they can't destroy enemy modules in time to prevent them from doing something truly damaging to you. And even after reading through it a few times, I'm still getting tripped up trying to fully understand what's happening with shredding, and certain things like requirements for using torpedoes aren't as immediately apparent as they probably should be. But that's relatively simple stuff that could be solved in the future. And those are my general thoughts on Breachway as it currently stands in November of 2024 when I'm writing up this script. I had a seizure when I was about halfway through writing this, so sorry that this video took much longer than usual to come out. It's been a very busy couple of weeks lately. Either way, I'd say it's definitely worth a try. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later. And lastly, a special thank you shout out to Turtle Taco, Sun Mingo, Scarlet, Mike Uniturtle, TheRat, and Reese. Thank you for the support.